and welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio, or email the show at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So today we're recording on International Women's Day, so I'm delighted to have some really innovative women on the show with me today. And the theme for today is Choose to Challenge. And as challenge seems to be a recurring theme on the show, we will make note of it today for International Women's Day. But frankly, I think this industry has its challenges, and that's plenty. So your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and I'm delighted to be joined now by Mary Conway. And Mary is one of probably the most interesting people in property, and she's doing something pretty exciting at the moment. So Janus Property. Mary, tell us, you're very welcome. Tell us about Janus Property.
Thanks, Carol, for the invite. As you said, my name is Mary Conway. My company is Janus Estates, and there are a couple of aspects to my business. I do the traditional sales, letting and management. But what I really want to talk about is what's called senior move management and age in place or live in place. And this is working with older people to decide where they want to live in the golden years.
Very good. It seems really relevant now because we've been having conversations around people downsizing. And I don't know if you recall, but about 2 or 3 years ago, that conversation really got quite controversial because what we saw was that people who'd been living in their own homes and contributing to their communities for, in some cases, decades and in some cases for generations, were essentially being told that they were almost a nuisance, that they were a problem, that they were, taking up stock that somehow they ought not to be. And the language and the messaging around it from government and policymakers was just so poor. And the backlash was absolutely understandably harsh. But the reality is, there are people who want to downsize, who maybe they find that their living situation now, it's not right for them. And really, this has to be something that people come into with choice. So for those people who are choosing for a change of circumstances, how can you help them?
Yes, and I'd like to kind of, that word downsizing comes across as being quite negative and was the word that was used in all that narrative. And that was actually 2016. So the ESRI and particularly Owen Corrigan have done quite a bit of work around that since. And out of 1,040 people surveyed, the biggest number of people had an emotional attachment to their home. It wasn't really for financial reasons. And I would prefer to look at it as right-sizing your home. So there's two ways of doing this. And I suppose everything has changed with COVID as well, because Irish people are very much traditionally, they like their back door, their front door, their garden. So unlike other countries, apartment living for older people isn't really something that they are comfortable with. So initially I was working really around the downsizing as such. I'm also now looking at what's called living in place. And I'm the first certified living in place professional trained from the Living in Place Institute in Colorado. And the motto is that all homes are safe, healthy and comfortable. So I'm coming to this with two hats, I suppose. My background is a nurse. I was a nurse for very many years. And I was always interested in the environment that my patients went home to. And whether it was a safe environment, if it was somebody who'd had, for example, a lung resection, did they have to climb stairs or was there a lift or what their bathroom facilities were like. And then I've been involved in property for 25 years. And a lot of what's going on at the moment is around, first-time buyers and getting on the ladder and, older people living in big houses should move out to let them in. But, it's not that simple. Somebody bought the house maybe as a newlywed 30, 40, 50 years ago, and there's 30, 40, 50 years of possessions. And where do you even start? So where I come in is I come in and I have the chat about what they want. And it could be that they want to stay in their own home, but, the bathroom is upstairs or the bathroom is old or there isn't an accessible shower. And these are the discussions that should be taken. before a traumatic event happens. There's one lady I can think of. She was a widow when she was 36. Her husband died a sudden death, and she was left with 4 small children. And she moved around quite a bit. And in her 70s, she moved from a 3-story house. She just turned 70. She was 88 at the weekend, and she's living in a dormer bungalow in a new community. And she's brought me in because she said she's 88 and she doesn't want to leave a mess for her family behind, to clear out the clutter and sort out the photographs and everything. And she's got her stair lift in for when she needs it. And really, she's done everything the right way. She moved when she was 70 into a new community where she was able to become part of the community and get to know her neighbours. And she's grown old in that community. And I think we had the conversation the other day, old age is 15 years ahead of what we think it is. So really, my whole thing is about planning now.
Mary, this doesn't often happen to me on the show, but I'm so struck by what you're saying. I'm always interested in the people who, have a lot of things going on that seem almost unrelated. And it's a little bit like Steve Jobs famously said in his iconic commencement speech about, joining the dots, how you can only do that looking backwards. And the fact that you have a background in nursing, you were nursing for 30 years, obviously you have experience of helping people, and, you bring a level of empathy and maybe knowledge. And I'm just going to say it, you probably bring a level of comfort to have these difficult conversations that a lot of property professionals wouldn't have. But coupled with that, I know you're an Airbnb superhost, and I know that actually you were the first female committee member of the largest landlord organisation in Ireland, the IPOA, who have been on the show with us previously. So you have this nursing background and all of the skills and temperament that brings in, as well as having this knowledge of property. So look, I think it's fair to say you're probably very uniquely qualified. I certainly haven't come across anybody in the industry in Ireland doing what you're doing. And I love that you're actually helping to change the language as well, because you're right, downsizing is what happens in a company when you lose your job as well. It does have lots of negative connotations, whereas I think right sizing is absolutely the language we need to be using. Living in place, I hadn't heard of that concept. Is that common in Ireland? Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Somebody could be living in a sitting room that has scatter rugs. It's got 10 years of newspapers in the corner because they haven't had the energy to take them out or clean them up. The bathroom is inaccessible. In Ireland, our doors, I think, are 33 inches in old measurement, whereas a wheelchair is 36. So even to get a wheelchair through can be impossible in a lot of older homes. And I'm not talking about major structural things or major, even just going in and looking at the coffee table. Are there rough edges on it that somebody's going to bump their shins off and get a pressure sore down the line that's going to cause a leg ulcer that's going to cause them problems down the line? And above all, I suppose, I'm just a very practical person. I just get stuck in, roll up my sleeves and see what needs to be done. And there's one lady I'm working with at the moment. She lost her husband 2 years ago, and then her son died quite suddenly. And she's just sold a very large home and she wants to downsize within her area. And the biggest challenge is getting a home for her that suits her needs. She wants a 2-bed townhouse in Dublin 4. So what I've said to her, well, look, maybe we'd look at buying an older apartment and just going in, stripping it all out and get everything future-proofed for the rest of your life. And she's delighted with this idea that, that she'll be going into something new that she has her stamp on.
But how close will she be to her previous home? Because we know that ideally you want to stay within like 500 meters of your home in order to sustain your local, whether it's a church or community group, or local butchers, your favorite restaurant, all of these community services, as well as friends, families, neighbors, but you're staying within your established community. In that particular case, is she staying close to her former home?
Yeah, we have yet to find something for her. We missed out on something that would have been perfect and was on the market for ages, but sold quite quickly. But we're going to look for something within the community because she still wants to worship at the same church and go to the same doctor and the same pharmacy. And these are the big worries for a lot of people that are moving. Can I still go and meet my friends? Can I still, is there a bus nearby? And we haven't really, as a society, catered for this. There's some housing bodies doing amazing work, like Clon, which is the older section of Clwyd, and Tuha, and some of the older, of the other housing bodies. But, developers don't see it as a priority because...
Okay, but I just because we deal with developers, so I'm privy to conversations, and actually we're hearing this more and more about the need for not just mixed tenure housing, but whole of life housing. So something that would be, intergenerational. And in fact, there's definitely a growing awareness of the community case for this, because actually people don't want to live in all of the same age and profile group. So in the same way that we know mixed tenure is the ideal, we also know that intergenerational living is probably the key to success in urban quarters. And it's new enough in its consideration to Ireland, and yet without a label, that's exactly what one of the keys to the successful neighbourhoods that we know in and around Dublin. Those most popular neighbourhoods would be ones that have naturally, organically intergenerational living. So I do think the conversation is shifting. So maybe the business case isn't there. Maybe the argument doesn't stack up. But, I do believe there's a growing awareness there. One of the things I was struck when I looked at Janus Estates is you have the meaning of the name on your website, and Janus is the Roman god of new beginnings, gates, doorways, and keys. And Janus frequently symbolized change and transitions, and progress from past to future. And I thought that was so perfect. It's unusual you come across a business that is so perfectly named. But look, I was really struck by the questions on your website aren't the usual questions that you would see on an estate agent's websites. So, for example, I was really surprised at how you tackle, going into a home, because you rightly pointed out, it's not necessarily financial reasons keeping people where they are. It's emotional, and it's not just emotional for the building, but for everything within the building, because there's a whole life's contents within the building. How do you even start to sit down and help somebody work through that?
Well, for a start, I'm a guest in their home, and they have thought long and hard about bringing me in to have the chat. And my client is always the person who's moving. It might be the son or daughter that has rang me and said, you need to go and talk to mum. She needs to sort the place out. She needs to go. And that is always a tense situation. When I get the call from the client, it's so much easier because you know that they're receptive. And it takes as long as it takes. We sit and we have a chat, and it could be the very last thing we discuss is, I need to move. Where do I start? So I think a lot of the time it's just the whole overwhelm of, sometimes they know where they're going. They could be moving in with a family member to a smaller space, or they want me to find somewhere for them to live. So they don't know what they can actually physically take yet. Or sometimes it's wonderful. I know exactly where they're going, and I look at a couch and say, no, that's too big. We need to go with something a little bit smaller. Do you want to go shopping? And we look for something. Or, there's 27 teapots, then because they've collected teapots all their life. And, we have to decide on 2 teapots, and we can make a photo book with the rest, or put them on a poster or do something to take them. The family really should, get in and give some help as well, because an older person can be living with belongings from their 40-year-old that's moved out 20 years ago. Their belongings are still in the room. So it's a case of getting everybody on board and saying, can you sort out your stuff? And I suppose I'd always leave somebody with a small job to do, like a drawer to start with. Everybody has an odds and ends drawer. Start with that, and even the feeling of accomplishing that. Now, we're also dealing with somebody who might be in pain, who might have an underlying medical condition, and are overwhelmed by the whole process. And I am distinct from a declutterer in that a declutterer will come into your house and they'll work through the day until it's done. I can work for 3 or 4 hours with somebody because that's all the attention span they have. And, they're picking up something that to me looks like, an old mug or whatever, but there's attachment to it. So I have to be firm and, work through the attachment, listen to the stories, listen to the memories, but, not get bogged down in one possession to keep everything moving.
Yeah. What needs to be done? Like, what policies do you think? Because, we started this interview by talking about, maybe some messaging from policymakers a number of years ago that was just so unhelpful that, I'd imagine even the current administration are nervous about even broaching this topic. And yet it's something that people need. On the policy side, what would you like to see happen? What do you think is needed for the people that you're dealing with?
Well, for a start, I think we need to look at our housing and our housing needs, and about developing communities within a community. We need to simplify the process as much as possible. People worry about, are they going to have stamp duty on their property? Are they going to pay capital gains tax? Things that... There can be things that we never even think about. Maintenance fees on a garden or in an apartment complex. Are they going to be able to afford those? There really aren't very many rental options. If somebody wanted to sell their home and move to rent a premises, rent an apartment or whatever, to see if they'd like apartment living. And not too many landlords are keen on taking an older person because, are they going to have security of tenure forever? And am I going to be able to put rents up? And so I suppose there really needs to be kind of designated age-friendly housing in the private sector. It's catered very well with the associated housing bodies, but not so much in the private sector.
Oh, that's an interesting one. All right. I suppose I hadn't considered maybe the rental. You assume that the rental market, whether you're looking at the social housing or whether you're looking at private rental, you just assume that it's open to everybody equally. And sure, of course, we know in real terms, that's not the case, that landlords have their preferred tenant, their persona that they see in the property for whatever reasons. So look, that's a really interesting one. Mary, that's all we've time for today, but I am genuinely thrilled to hear about what you're doing. Like I said, I don't know anybody else in the Irish marketplace who's doing it. But also, I think that it's great that you have this background in nursing, that you have all of these skills, and of course, fully licensed sales and letting agent. But I also feel that this is a service that a lot of estate agents wouldn't feel so comfortable in getting involved in. So from that point of view, I think it's a really important one, and I wish you the very best of luck with it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. That was Mary Conway, Janus Estates. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Now, I'm joined by Anne-Louise Hannon, a well-known face to many, I'm sure, former commercial property consultant and now personal styling and image consultant with Style Elevate. And Louise, that's a very long description.
It is, Carol.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted you were able to join us. As I mentioned, you're a very well-known name across commercial property and indeed agency work in Dublin. But you've had something of a pivot. This has been an interesting year for many, but you've certainly turned it into a very interesting year. So, well, look, first of all, we might just position this by saying that, of course, you used to work with CBRE in the office side of things, and you had been well known there. This seems like a fascinating time for the office and the future of the office. Where do you stand on that debate?
Yeah, no, thanks, Carol. So the last 7 years I was working in CBRE. So definitely, I think COVID has given us all a time to kind of sit back and consider our next step. So that certainly happened in my case. And what was born out of it was a new business, so Style Elevate. But most certainly in the offices, I mean, I definitely would miss the office environment myself. But there's still real value to be had in the office. I mean, in terms of collaboration and creativity, I think it's definitely been lost over the last little while. And obviously we can still continue on thanks to technology, but you certainly do miss it. Look, I don't think our homes were never meant to be our offices in most cases. But undoubtedly, I think flexible working will change going forward. And I certainly see there being a hybrid approach. But just from, my colleagues, my ex-colleagues in the industry and indeed friends have said there's definitely been a pickup in momentum over the last number of weeks anyway, which is a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point about coming together for collaboration and creativity, that's something we've really just realised ourselves within Property District over the last number of months that, I was saying, or even really we've realised in the last couple of weeks, productivity is way up, creativity has not increased at the same level at all. And again, we're human and we need that human interaction. So I think the office will become the place of that. Maybe not for deep work, but certainly for any collaborative work like that.
I definitely think so, yeah.
And Louise, I mentioned at the start here that, it's been a really interesting year for everybody, irrespective of the sector that you're in. But you've really taken some bold decisions this year. Talk to us about Style Elevate.
I have, yeah, Carol. I mean, it's something I always kind of wanted to explore my creative potential. And I think that's something, as I just kind of said at the start, that it was sitting with me for a while and kind of, having the courage to kind of do something a little bit different. I've certainly pivoted from property, although, I'd still like to kind of seek out opportunities within the property industry still. But most certainly I wanted to follow through on a dream of mine, which was to own my own business. So I'm delighted with how things have gone. It's set up since November. So it started out as an online business. And thankfully, all of my services can be held online through Zoom. So it's done quite well now, I have to say, and it's great to still have the connections within the property industry as well. So it is it's a business focused towards women. So the whole idea of to elevate is really kind of to elevate and empower women to really kind of dress for themselves. And I think from working in the property industry over the last 10 years, I sort of noticed kind of throughout the years a little bit of a disconnect with some women and kind of their personality matched with the clothes that they chose to wear. I think, we were just even having a conversation about us both wearing red. I certainly think that, colour psychology has proven that it can really empower us, and it can be quite powerful in certain situations and certain environments. So I certainly challenge my clients to test out, and we try out new colours on them. But it's something that I've been passionate about for years. And I really think it's lovely to see when you see someone's personality and character come through. As you know, property is still quite a male-dominated industry, and that has changed throughout my career over the last 10 years. But it is great to see younger women coming through. And I think personal branding is something that we can all still work at. It comes more natural to others. But I certainly think through clothes, we can definitely make a stronger impact with our personal branding.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm definitely somebody who doesn't know much about fashion, but also doesn't think a lot about fashion. So, from the time I left college, my background was in law, and I wore a dark trouser suit. I channeled my inner Hillary Clinton, but dark trouser suit, white shirts every day, same day, or same thing for years. And when I started out my own business, which is 15, 16 years ago, I swore I wouldn't do that. And I tried to make an effort for maybe a couple of weeks or months, got bored, and then ended back in the very same suit, same thing.
I know.
And it was actually, you and I were talking about color psychology, and I always wear black, white, or gray in work, or blue if I'm on stage. And because I knew I was talking to you today, I picked the only thing that wasn't black or white or gray in my wardrobe. And we log on and we're wearing almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Which I think goes to show my lack of imagination, that was all I could do. But one of the things that you said to me that really struck with me, I'm fascinated by the concept of personal branding now.
Yeah.
But only because I found myself in a position where I was writing books and doing TV work and radio, and I had no concept of what a personal brand was.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really realized was that if you don't, just because you don't shape or make any effort to pull together a cohesive personal brand, doesn't mean you don't have one, because actually everybody has a brand. It's what you're presenting to the world. But the problem is, if you're not crafting it, then it is open to interpretation by anybody. And I think that's something that, I'm 20 plus years into my career, but for people just coming out of university and going into the workplace now, I think the need for personal branding certainly appears to be much higher than it might have been 20 years ago. Is that a fair assessment?
I definitely think so, Carol. And I think it comes more natural to others. I mean, I think I was always acutely aware of it throughout my time in property. And I don't know, it was something that my dad had said to me years ago, saying that your personal brand is really your trademark. And when you leave a room, what do you want people to say about you? And I think that's stuck with me throughout. And I think that's why I think there is a great importance, and to place it, there is an importance of it, even amongst organizations, to take the young graduates through that. And it does come down to the individual, absolutely. And like I said, it is probably comes with age and a bit of confidence building as well. But I certainly think, there is kind of, psychologists call it thin slicing, where unfortunately, through the first 7 seconds of meeting someone, they will, I suppose, have an idea of who you are as a person, which seems very unfair, but unfortunately we don't like to talk about it. But appearance does play a big, huge part in that. And, that's what I'm trying to do with clients. You mentioned there, Carol, that, you're busy and you don't really think about what you're wearing, but it is really to bring more awareness to that. And even in certain settings, like we are today, wearing kind of a bold color, but knowing your audience, you're certainly not, going to wear more of a relaxed look, going into maybe meet solicitors, for instance. So depending on the organization, I think we can all kind of maybe focus a little bit more on our presentation. And even I do work with corporates at the moment, and we do sessions called grooming for Zooming. So it's a little bit catchy, but it's more the focus and the emphasis is on kind of your top half of your body. So again, that's playing on the color psychology, but just little style cues that people can take on board. The whole idea of kind of, fashion and styling, it's certainly not that you have to be on top of the latest fashion trends. It really isn't. What I try to do, and working one-to-one with clients, I can achieve this, and thankfully the feedback has been great, is really to draw in on their likes. What do they like to wear, and how do they like to feel when they wear certain clothes? So I think that's something that's key, and really plays on authenticity as well, which again feeds back to your personal brand.
Yeah, I love when you're talking about personal branding that you bring authenticity into it, because I think maybe some of the early work around personal brand mightn't have highlighted that so much. And the reality is you still have to be yourself. You have to be true to yourself. That authenticity, it's become a bit of a cliche to say it, but actually you have to be yourself. It's too exhausting trying to be something or someone else. So I think that's a really key integral part of it. But this grooming for Zooming, I love that. Is that for men? Is that for men and women?
Yeah, so a lot of the corporates that I'm working with, obviously I cater to a diverse audience. So I will tailor any of my corporate events that I am doing. They usually take an hour long, kind of a lunch and learn type setting, but they are tailored and can be obviously to a male audience. And what I will say is I while my business is focused and kind of centered more towards women, I have been approached as well to style men. So just if there's any men watching that think it is just, yeah, well,
Is it more difficult? Because what I'm seeing is that I think women have evolved out of maybe, I might have been a decade behind the trend, but women have evolved out of suits in the workplace over the past more than 10 years. Like I said, I'm very behind the curve on that. But I think it's much more difficult. Is it fair to say, is it more difficult for men to get that balance of smart casual, understanding the workplace? Of course, I presume it depends on the workplace and the type of workplace that you're in, whether it's a tech company or a legal firm. But is it more difficult for men to get that balance of smart casual right?
It can be. And I mean, I've friends of mine that are males in the industry, and, it is that kind of like, do I wear runners? Do I, are jeans appropriate? And the summertime is always a funny time as well, because naturally there's warmer weather and, what is kind of appropriate. So yeah, you'd be right to say, I think for women, we probably find it a little bit easier with the smart casual look. So with men, actually with sizing with men are quite good in that their clothes that they probably buy online, they know what they like, they know what they don't like. So whereas sometimes with women, particularly with some designer clothes, and the sizing can be a little bit off. So I think what we're finding at the moment and working with clients is it's a bit of trial and error, and that can be frustrating. Whereas normally if we were in the shops, kind of you'd be able to feel a garment or know more about the fabric. So actually, for men at the moment, I think it's a lot easier to style. But again, it totally comes back to the organisation, like you touched on, Carol. And that's what, if people are going for interviews, I would normally ask them a little bit about who, what type of organisation and what the ask is from the organisation. And I think, again, that comes down back to kind of your personal branding, is not to kind of deviate too far away from that. Obviously, stay true to yourself, but also if we're in kind of a legal setting, obviously maybe more tailored suits might have to be worn. So yeah, I definitely would kind of caveat that it's, well, actually probably going forward now, just the way we are working and probably more hybrid approach as we discussed, there might be more of a relaxed kind of office, attire really.
Yeah, there's a definite sense of things changing. But we're having this conversation on International Women's Day, yes, which is great. I love that. But it's, we're not just having this conversation because it's International Women's Day, but it's great the way it fell. You're coming from an early stage career where even without you and I ever needing to have a conversation about it, I know, because I know the women you've been surrounded by. You've absolutely been surrounded by some of the powerhouse women within this industry. So, I wonder, maybe it's different coming from the career that you've had, where you've seen women in leadership positions, strong, influential in the industry, and exceptionally good at their job, and have risen to very senior ranks and are very respected within the industry. Do you think that's representative of the planning, construction, and, well, maybe not so much construction, but certainly the real estate industries in Ireland?
Yeah, I do, Carol. And it's, again, something that I've been hugely passionate about. I've sat on kind of diversity boards, and the day that's in it, talking about gender equality, I think there can be more done, and I think definitely as industry leaders, we need more female representation, particularly at board level. But no, thankfully I have had really strong powerhouse women, as you alluded to, kind of championing me really throughout my career in property. But what I will say is also I've had very strong male I suppose mentors the whole way up as well. And I think that's worth mentioning. It's definitely, it's a day for, to celebrate women. But also I think if we can work more cohesively, there won't be us versus them conversations happening. So I think that's really important. And it is really actually about opening up conversations and leaning in maybe towards, male figures or male bosses, throughout our careers. I think that's probably really important to say as well. But mostly, I've had nothing but good experiences throughout my 10 years.
I'm delighted. Obviously I'm delighted to hear that, but I'm particularly delighted to hear you talk about the importance of mentoring from both male and female, because I think, if we don't position it like that, then not only are we excluding men from the conversation, but we're kind of excusing them from the conversation as well. And that doesn't help the industry. So I think it's really important that we look at this holistically. It's not enough to look at the figures and say there are X number of men, X number of women. For me, I'm always interested in who's kind of at board level, who's making the decisions. I think that's where we're getting the test, and there's still a decade of growing into that needs to happen, and it might feel frustratingly slow, but for me it's important that from a board level point of view, and certainly from the decision-making point of view, that things are changed, but in a way that almost brings us full circle back into the whole thing about personal brand and how you champion yourself throughout your career. Just, I suppose, before we finish up, is there a difference, do you see, with maybe young surveyors entering into the industry now, between males and females? Is there a difference between the ones who might actually prioritize personal branding, or perhaps seem to be particularly good at it? Maybe it comes more naturally to either men or women?
Yeah, I think it's something we all have to try better at. And, I suppose even going through your kind of KPIs nearly every month, I think we used to have them, and really kind of honing in on that and, putting it down as something that we all need to work on. But networking, unfortunately, we probably haven't been doing as much networking as we would have liked during this time, kind of during the past year, really. But networking, it's still something that, should be within everyone's kind of, even just getting out for coffees during the week. That was always kind of cemented, in me working in CBRE, was that, you need to get out and start meeting your peers. And I think that will really stand to you. And definitely just, having the confidence, I suppose, to speak out. And I think, given the day that we're in it, International Women's Day as well, just having a voice and being visible, I think that's, it definitely does come more natural to others. But I think pushing ourselves and just making sure that, I suppose, we're getting, a name for ourselves out there is really key, just even at graduate surveyor level. But I know there's more happening in the background, like you said, like with the SCSI, the mentorship program that's happening. So there is there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes. And I really hope to see that continue, because it's certainly an industry that for both male and female, having both perspectives, particularly, in pitch-like settings, and winning business settings, it is really crucial going forward on board level, like you just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that we're starting to see people in this holistic way, and trying to bring out the wholeness of people. I think that can only be a good thing. Thank you so much. No, that was great. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Anne-Louise Hannon, former commercial property consultant and now personal styling and image consultant with Style Elevate. Anne-Louise, before we finish up, what's your website? The new website?
Yeah, my website is www.styleelevate.ie. And if anyone wants to reach out, they can just email me at info@styleelevate.ie.
We'll be back after a quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. My third guest for this week is one I'm particularly excited about that she's joining us. It's Bronnie Wilson, Equium Regional Head of the UK and Ireland. Bronnie, you're very welcome.
Hi, lovely to see you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I'm surprised it's taken this long, but we have had some of your colleagues. Join us over the last year or two, so I'm delighted you're in a position to join us today. Look, many people through our conversations about PropTech, as well as interviewing some of your colleagues, will be familiar with Equium. But you might just want to give people a bit of a background as to what the company does.
Yeah, absolutely. So my accent probably gives it away that we're actually founded in Australia. So I'm based in London. I came over here about 3 years ago to open our first international office. And shortly after, we also expanded to the US, and we have offices on the east and west coast. So Equium is at its core a tenant experience platform provider. We launched almost maybe more than 9 years ago now, actually, in Australia. And it was really the brainchild of Lorenz Grollo and our CEO, Gab McMillan. And Lorenz is a third generation property developer in Australia. And at the time, they were looking at a regeneration project for a building that he co-owns, which was nearing about 25 years old at the time. There's probably about 4,500 people work in the building. And before they committed to going in and doing this redevelopment, they really wanted some data on who were the occupiers in the building, and not just the companies, but who were the individuals who worked in this building, and what did they want? What was going to keep people stickier to the site? What sort of retail would suit their day-to-day that they would support, and all of that data that just at that point wasn't available to landlords at all. And so this idea formed for Lorenz of leveraging technology in the property industry, which was really in its infant stage then, and the term prop tech wasn't even being thrown around. So it was about getting closer to the customer, leveraging the data that was available, and then making investment decisions for his assets, really based on what his customer wanted, and thinking more broadly of customer as everybody that used that space, and not just the tenants in the building, but retailers and service providers and visitors who were coming into that space to dine and shop. So that was really where we started.
Very good. The whole concept of tenant experience, certainly I've been in this industry for more than a decade and a half, and a decade ago, tenant experience meant it wasn't really a term that was used so much, but I think that is shaped up in different ways. Whereas I think reimagining who the tenant is, as opposed to, the staff within the occupying business, that was probably very forward thinking. And it occurs to me, of course, that some of that data would obviously have been available. It was just never pulled together. So in terms of getting started, how do you start where the data hasn't been collected previously? And obviously a lot has changed in the last 9 years. But, even to get started, how did all of that early stage data come together?
Yeah, so early on, we've got a really sophisticated data and analytics platform. So we've been collecting data on users' actions and preferences, since we launched 9 years ago. But that has evolved massively, particularly in the last few years. We've really invested heavily in building out an analytics platform that can show not just us, but our customers who use our technology. They have their own dashboard, and they can see everything that their users do in anonymized data. So what time do they open newsletters? What content are they reading? Are they going to events? What sort of events are they attending? How many maintenance requests are coming through the building? And, are they more air conditioning? Are they cleaning? And so not just surfacing that data, but helping our customers to really create insights from that data that they can use in making decisions. One of the most recent things we've done is built out a leasing dashboard within our analytics platform that allows our customers to upload their lease expiry data, and then they can overlap that with their tenant experience data. And so from that, you start to get a picture of who's in my building, when are their lease expiries, and how happy are they in the building, and then creating a tenant experience engagement plan that sort of, is based on that data.
And is that all automated?
Yep.
Okay, so just in terms, because, one of the things that we try to do here is we talk about data a lot. And what we realize is that actually it helps if people understand what that data is. So, you talked about maybe understanding the actions of people, when they go into the workplace, and it can be as simple as, what route do they take to get to a certain place? But how much does that kind of information impact on investment decisions?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually, because, so often we have, as you said, millions of data points at our fingertips, but are we using them to make decisions? And one of the things that we really help our customers to do is when we first start working together, we define what their objectives are, and then through there, we help them to create campaigns that feed into those objectives. So if we're looking at, in a year's time, they'll be doing redevelopment with, the lobby area, then what we may do is help them collect data about what sort of food options are people most interested in. If we're looking at food and beverage retail, what's the price point that people want to spend? And make sure they're bringing in, retail that's actually going to be suitable for their building. Other things we'll do is work with them on understanding the kind of services and amenities that are required. Are there enough, wellbeing providers in the area? If there's not, can we help them build into their development plans to bring in some space that you could use for yoga or boot camp or any of those things? And helping them essentially to mine that data for the stuff that's going to be useful for their own strategic plans.
Yeah, one of the things that really occurs to me, we've seen a huge increase in the number of IoT sensors going into smart buildings. So therefore, we're collecting information, the type that maybe wasn't collected before or wasn't, maybe it wasn't a priority. Some of these kind of non-sexy topics that suddenly are very, very important, like indoor air quality, again, that has been collected for a number of years, but suddenly only in the context of COVID-19, that's become important. Similarly, talking about how HVAC systems operate, air exchanges, how frequent they are. These are the conversations that have been highlighted during COVID-19, but they're conversations that were starting to grow in importance in light of sustainability measures and initiatives that were taken. But over the last year, the data that's being collected, how representative of, I suppose, reality is that with people working in such artificial conditions, even those who are in workplaces?
Yeah, look, I think the customers that we're working with here are probably the more further along in this journey. But still, as you say, a lot of this stuff is very early stages. So we're seeing, our customers at the stage where they've input sensors and they're starting to look at that data and starting to understand it. But as you say, nothing that's happened in the last 12 months is, benchmarkable, right? And so I think we're really at the start of that journey. And certainly what we're seeing is landlords say, we want to know that your platform will integrate with everything else. We want to know that we can install these sensors and we can pull the data in, but we don't yet know what we want to see with this data or what we're going to do with it. Are we going to open these dashboards up to our occupiers? Are we going to keep this as a tool for ourselves? And a lot of it at the moment is just really understanding that stuff, understanding the technology, making sure it works, and just making a start on it.
Absolutely. And I understand that Equium is working across a number of different markets. So I'm sure there's a difference there. So, for example, in the US, I was reading about how, even actually prior to the outbreak of COVID, we were learning about how the energy performance of a building going back a certain number of years would be required to be disclosed for any lease negotiations. We're not there yet in Ireland or the UK, but that's something that maybe will become best practice before it becomes a statutory requirement. How much of a difference is there across the sectors that are the different geographical markets that you're working across?
Absolutely huge. When I spent a lot of time in Australia working in property management before I started with Equium. And one of the things that really struck me when I came to the UK was how far behind Australia we are here. In Australia, many, many years ago, we introduced mandatory disclosure for energy rating and if you're leasing space, you'll give your water rating, your energy, your indoor air quality, and all of this stuff would be publicly available information, and some of it mandated. And when I came here, I was just really shocked that it wasn't the same. And I know Neighbours, which is the rating system they use in Australia, is actually becoming involved with, setting some of this stuff up in the UK. And I'd say, the UK and the US, for some areas, the UK is ahead and for some, the US is ahead, but they're more or less, on the same path, I think.
This might be an unfair question to ask, but I'm just curious. From Equium's point of view, with the innovative work that you're offering to the industry, is it better for you to go into an industry like Ireland and the UK that is a little bit behind? Is there more potential there, or is the fight to get people to understand the need for this too great?
Oh, that's such a great question. It is neither better or worse, really. I think, it helps us when there's an understanding in the industry about why you would launch a platform like ours and what the value is. But you've got, this period before there's that awakening when there's not a lot of competition. And now everybody's saying, right, we need to do this. We know we need a platform and an app for our building. We know we need to integrate, which is fantastic. But then the market's also more competitive now.
Yeah, one thing I remember hearing, decades ago about competition, when somebody was trying to point out the importance of competition in a marketplace, it was like, well, if you've no competition, you can't be number one. And actually that really stuck with me.
I love it. We're using our marketing. But I think it's a fantastic time for prop tech providers now, I think. We were just talking about in a sales meeting we had internally on Friday that when our sales team make first contact with customers, the answer now is never, we don't see the value in that. The answer is, we've just started this journey where we're gearing up to do an RFP, or yes, we're interested in talking, or we know that's something we need to do, but our hands are full with other projects. But it's never, we don't see the value in tenant experience, which is a really, really exciting place to be.
Yeah, no, it's amazing actually to see how that conversation has shifted in recent years. Yeah. I suppose before we finish up, one of the things that I'm curious about, because I'm assuming that you have you've better data in terms of insights to understand the requirements of people returning to the workplace, because there's such a conversation going on and it's very opinion driven. Have you any insights that you can point to that really teach us something about how people are feeling about returning to the workplaces in terms of their safety?
Yeah, look, I think it's very interesting. So we did a global data gathering, and we used polls and surveys for all our users. And we did that early on with lockdown, and we did it again a couple of months ago as things have really shifted. And And it was very interesting to me, particularly in the UK. Initially, the question about when do you think you'll go back to the office and what needs to happen for you to feel comfortable, that was all around safety. There was a lot of feedback about, temperature testing and cleaning processes and being able to book arrival and how well social distancing was being managed in the building. And that really changed. Even before we were doing kind of mass vaccine rollout, we saw this shift where people's requirement to come back in was more about their own situation. People tossing up how much time they were spending commuting now, and what sort of services and amenities their building had. Could they do their, gym workouts in the office? Were restaurants going to be open? And it was a lot more about that stuff than it was, is there going to be social distancing in place?
That's interesting to hear that moving on because, again, certainly in Ireland, we're still in a stage of level 5 lockdown, and we have been since just after Christmas. So there hasn't been any return to the workplace in 2021 at all. And it's certainly more protracted than most building owners or occupiers or employers would have thought. And also we're looking at it being pushed out until after Easter and possibly longer. So I think it's really important for employers to have a good handle on how their individual team members are feeling about returning to the workplace. And, that's one thing that we're starting to see more teams being asked their opinion and being surveyed, but in a way, maybe not just given 3 or 4 questions based on safety, because actually what we're seeing, much like you've said there, is a complete change in priorities, and it might be more around how can they access the office without using public transport, or other considerations. What's open in and around the workplace? Is it going to be phased working, or will, how will existing facilities be shared on a phased basis? And to me, it seems almost too early to try solve some of those problems in Ireland. But I presume, again, you're dealing with marketplaces that are a little bit further ahead. Have there been any key learnings that we should be taking on board in Ireland and the UK?
Oh, that's a hard question. There's nothing really that springs to mind. I think, our journey here has been quite similar to Ireland in that, it got better for a while and then it got worse. And, we've had, I think this is our 3rd lockdown, and like you, it's quite extended. I think the biggest takeaway from all the data that we've looked at and the feedback we've had from, the occupier and the individual is that these choices of coming back to work now are driven by the individual, as you say. And so that landlords have to stop thinking about what that customer, the occupier says and does, and more about what the individual wants and needs and what's going to drive them back to the office. So I think, regardless of the fact that we're still in lockdown, the sooner landlords are looking at their offering and thinking, is this enough to attract individuals back in, the sooner they're going to have buildings full again.
Yeah. Bronnie, thank you so much. It feels almost too early to be having that conversation, but yet we do need to be starting to make preparations and things like that. But it is certainly a movable feast at this stage.
Absolutely.
I absolutely appreciate you joining us today and sharing those insights. And again, I feel it's really incumbent on us to learn from some of the markets that are a little bit further ahead, even in terms of successfully navigating the return to the workplace. We want to learn as much as we can about what's worked and what hasn't worked and try integrate that here in Ireland and the UK. So I genuinely appreciate your time today. That was Bronnie Wilson, Regional Head. Thank you. Regional Head of Ireland and the UK at Equium. That's it from us today. Thank you for listening into Property Matters on Dublin South FM. Again, you can get in touch with the show on social media at iPropertyRadio or by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com. as also my thanks to Peter Rice on sound. And as mentioned last week, our producer Katie has moved on, and we'll be introducing new producer Keane over the coming weeks. But that's it from us today. We're back at the same time next week. For myself, Carol Tallon, and all the team here, stay safe.